In this video, we'll be looking at how to incorporate a Bootstrap Navbar component with routing into our React application. So stick around and I'll show you how to do it. Hey guys, how's it going and welcome to the channel. If you like the content of this video, please give it a like, share and add a comment in the comments below and hit that subscribe button and bell icon. Now back to the video. Okay, so let's take a look at the application we're going to be building. And as you can see, we've got a Bootstrap Navbar at the top of our page, which has 3 links in it. We've got our home, our features, and our pricing link. When we click on a link, it should take us to the correct component. So if we click on pricing, it takes us to pricing. If we click on features, it takes us to features, home to home, etc. And if we click on the Navbar brand, it also takes us back to the home component. What you'll also notice is that the URL path name changes accordingly. So if we click on features again, we've got features in the URL path name. Pricing's the same. Home just returns us without any path name. And if we were to type an invalid URL path name, it takes us to a page not found component. You'll notice as well that none of the links are now highlighted as they're not the active links as they were before. i.e. pricing, active link, features, active link, home, active link. What we also need to ensure is that this is working in the mobile view. And in that mobile view, we get a burger button, which toggles our menu. And when we click on a link, it has the same functionality, but in addition to that, it also closes the navbar. And that's it. So let's get started. Okay, so I've installed a new React application using Create React App and I've called it React Bootstrap 5 Navbar. The next step is to remove some of the files that are installed automatically with Create React App because we're just not going to need them for this application. So I'm going to remove the app CSS, the app test, index CSS, the logo, this report web vitals and the setup test file. And then I'll remove any references to those as import files. So let's get rid of these. Now, if you don't remove the references, then you will start getting errors. So we need to get rid of these 2 references out of the app.js file. And in our index.js file, we need to remove this line, and this line. We can get rid of this as well. And we're just going to remove this default code in here and replace that with a H1 tag and our title. And I've typed npm start to get our development server up and running. And as you can see, that's now loaded up in a browser window on localhost 3000. So that is our app up and running. Okay, so what we need to do now is install Bootstrap into our application. And we do that by typing npm install Bootstrap and hitting enter. And once that's installed, we can just double check that we've actually got it in our package.json file. So if we look, we've got Bootstrap version 5.2, which is exactly what we want. Just close that down. Now, if we go back to our browser window, we'll notice that nothing's actually changed. This font is exactly the same as it was before. And the reason is that we've not actually imported Bootstrap into our application. We've installed it, but we've not imported it into the relevant file. So we're going to do that now. Right, so we now need to just import that Bootstrap because we've installed it, and we now need to just import it into our index.js file. I'm just going to paste this line in. So we should now have all of Bootstrap CSS available to us in our application. And if we head back to our browser window, we can see the font has now changed because it's applying Bootstrap CSS to it. Now we need to create a components folder within our src folder. So components. And then within that, we need to create a Navbar component. So that's Navbar Navbar.js. And all I've done there is I've created a file within its own folder by the same name. So as you can see, I've got a Navbar folder with the Navbar.js component inside, and I'm just going to use the snippet RAFCE, which will create a component for me. And then I'm going to go to the app.js file, and I can now import that here. I can get rid of this H1, and I can go Navbar, and that's going to import automatically if I hit enter. And that all looks good. And now if we head back to our browser window, we should see that the H1 tag that was in the app.js file is now replaced with the Navbar component. And we can now go on to bringing in the actual Bootstrap Navbar component, which is what we'll do next. So if we head on over to Bootstrap's website, and we can see that we're at version 5.2, which is correct. And then under docs, which we're in anyway, we can just navigate down here to Navbar, click on Navbar, and it gives us quite a few Navbars to choose from. I'm just looking for a relatively easy one. I want it with the brand, but I also want it with some links. So this one's looking good. So if we click copy, that's going to take all that code there, and then we flip back to our VS Code window, and then we go into our Navbar component, and we can get rid of this now. We don't need any of that. If we go back to our browser window, you can see that it's actually imported that Navbar, which is great. Now it's not functioning correctly or it's certainly not functioning as we want it to, but at least it's in there. Now if we come back into VS Code, we'll just have a quick look at this error message that we're getting, or this warning that we're getting here. And it's around this href, and it's basically saying that we haven't provided it with a proper link to anything. So at this stage, I'm not going to worry too much about it, because some of this is going to get replaced. When we start the work with React Router, this is all going to be replaced anyway, and it'll be a different syntax. So I'm not overly worried about that. I'll just save it just to format it a little bit better. What I do need to do though is address this error that's coming up in the console. So it's saying that it's an invalid DOM property class. Did you mean class name? Well, yes, I did. And the reason why is that React doesn't use the word class. It uses class name. So what I need to do is change all these classes to class name. I can do that by just kind of going down them and just changing those to class name and saving. And that's now fixed that error message. What I also want to do is just add in an extra class here and change this to BG primary, just to give it a different look. You can see I've got a nice blue look to it now. And there's my burger menu as well. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is install React Router, and we can do that by doing npm install React Router -dom, hit enter, and we'll give that a few seconds to let that install. And that's done. And now we can set up our routes. So within our src folder, I'm going to create another folder called routes. Within our routes folder, we now need to create the individual routes. So we're going to need one for home, for features, for pricing, and for page not found. Make sure you're in the routes folder. Hit the file icon, home.js. That's our first one, that's our home route. And we want features. And into pricing. Finally, page not found. There are our routes. So let's just put in our React component content. So I'm going to use RAFCE as a snippet. That's fine. And that's all our routes set up. So if we head back to our application, what we've got again is our navbar that we've got these links to. So we've got our home, our features, our pricing. We're going to get rid of that disable one. We don't need that one. But like I said, these aren't working correctly. Now what we actually want is we want our component to sit underneath this navbar. And to do that, we need to create another component, and we're going to call that main. We'll do that now. So in our components folder, do the same sort of thing, but we want to call this main. And this is where we actually use the code to set up our routes. So what we now need to do is import a couple of things from React Router, and that's routes and route, and they're from React Router DOM. We can then come down here, get rid of this, and we can create our routes. Close that off. And then within that, we create a route which has a path. Our first one is going to be just /, and then it has an element. And that element is going to be our home. Should be able to import it just like that. And then we just need to close off that route. And then we can copy that down 4 times. So we can now put in here features. Change that to features. Pricing. Pricing. And then we have a wildcard for anything else, which will be our page not found component. So there are our routes set up. Now what we need to do is go to our index file, and we need to import, and this is browser router as router. We're just changing the name of it there just to make it easier. from React router DOM, and we're going to wrap our whole application in that root component. Save that. And the final thing we need to do is go into our app.js and actually import that main component that we've created. Okay, that's not automatically imported, so we'll just import it. And wrap this in a fragment. Save that. And now if we head back to our application, we should hopefully, fingers crossed, be able to see our routes working. So we're currently in the home route. Let's try features. So yeah, we can see that that's changed to features. Let's try pricing. Yeah, change the pricing. And let's try anything else. And we get a page not found component. So that's our router working. Now we just need to sort the links out. What we need to do now is import link from React router DOM. And now we can go down, find all our A tags and replace them with a link. And we'll just get rid of this disabled link as well. We're not going to be using it in this application. What we can also get rid of is this unordered list. So I'll just change that to a div. And that means that we can get rid of these lines, because this will work without them. There's one more thing we need to do just to make sure this is working correctly. Is I need to change this to 2. So this is our home page slash features pricing, and then just the last one is Navbar. And now if we go back to our application, we should have the links triggering the routes. So we've got a home, taking us to a home, features to our features, pricing to pricing, and Navbar also takes us back to the home component, and you can see the path name changing with features, pricing. Let's just test out our invalid link, page not found. Great. So that is our React router added now to our application. Okay, so we've got our React router working now, but if we check out our mobile view, we've still got a problem. This burger button isn't working at all. We can still navigate. Now, if I was to put features here, we can still navigate to our features component and pricing, etc. We can still click back to our home, but we want to get our burger menu working, and that should be expanding our menu, our nav menu. So let's take a look at that now. So if we jump back into our index.js file, I'm just going to paste the following line. What that's doing is it's adding Bootstrap.js to our application. So if we jump back into our application, now let's see what happens now. So interestingly now that is working, and that's because it's using the vanilla JavaScript from Bootstrap. We imported that into our index.js file. And we can click the links. And it's working something like how we want it to. So to see exactly what's going on here, we need to click into our elements. We need to open the body. We need to open this root div. We need to open our nav, this div, and this navbar, and these. Now let's see what happens now. Can you see that what's happening here is it's adding classes. It's adding certain classes, specifically this one here that's saying to show. So that's saying show the collapsed navbar. If I click on it again, the show has gone. And in this top one, we've got navbar toggler. If I click on that again, it's saying it's now collapsed. So it's added the collapsed, or it's actually removed it when you're clicking it. And what we need to do now is to add that functionality to our navbar component. But what we want to handle this is React. We don't want vanilla.js handling it. We don't want Bootstrap's.js handling it. We want React to handle it. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So what we need to do is have some state management within our navbar component. And with that, it'll give us the options of adding and removing classes based on the value of the state. So let's introduce useState. And then what we want to do is set up our initial state value. So we can do that using the useState snippet. And I'm going to call this show collapsed nav. And I'm going to give it initial value of false. Then we need a way of changing that useState value, or changing that value of show collapsed nav. And because it's a toggle button, we want to be able to flip between false and true whenever we click it. To manage the state change, then we need to create a function. So I'm using another snippet, and we're going to call it handle nav button. And we're not passing any parameters, so we can get rid of that. And then what we'll need to do to change our show collapsed nav state value is we use the set show collapsed nav. So what's happening here is that when this function, this handle nav button function gets called, it's going to set the state of show collapsed nav from the previous state to the current state. And that's all it's doing. So in essence, that's going to toggle between false and true. And the way we call that function is to add an on-click handler to our burger button. So then we need to apply some logic to change the value of this class name when we click on the toggle button. So what we're saying here is if show collapse nav is true, then add the show class to it. And if it's false, remove it. And if we go back into our index.js file, and we comment out this JavaScript line now, and then head back to our application, just open these up again. And if we click the toggle button, we can see now that it's applying the same sort of logic, but React's now doing it rather than Bootstrap's JavaScript. We can see that this is adding the show value and then removing it on click. And that's what we want. But we also need to apply similar logic to this class here on the button, and also this area expanded, which is for screen readers. So let's do that. Back in our Navbar.js, we can add the same sort of logic. So show collapse nav, and we apply the same thing to the button. And that should now all be working correctly. So if we head back to our application, and we've got our classes here again, so if we click, you can see the classes are changing. So that's all working. Right, so now what we need to do is, on these links, we need to ensure that these are not only changing to the active link, so it's currently stuck at home, as in the color of the font is white, indicating that that is the active link. And we need to change that accordingly when each link is clicked. But we also want to collapse the navbar when we click in a link. So let's have a look at that now. We'll go back into VS Code. And we can see here that this active class is being applied to the first link. But what we need it to do is to be applied to whichever link has been clicked. And we're going to need another bit of state to do that, which will be managed again by our component. So if we go back up here and we use our useState snippet again, and we call this active navlink, and we're going to set it to just an empty string. Then we'll add another function which will handle this piece of state. So our snippet again, and we're going to call this handle navlink. This time it's going to take in the event, because we're going to be calling this from each one of our links. We're going to first set show collapse nav to false. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change the set active nav link to the event dot target dot inner HTML. And then on each nav link we're going to apply the logic. So we're going to say active nav link is equal to the inner HTML, which in this case is home, and that's going to be then the active nav, or it's going to apply the active class to the existing class, else don't apply that. And then we can copy that and do the same thing here. Except this one is going to be features. And the same thing here. This one's going to be pricing. So it's saying if the value of the active link, the one that we've just clicked, is a string that says the name of the link, then set it to the active value, else set it to just navlink. And to call that handle navlink function, we need to add an on-click to each of these links. So on-click, and we call the handle navlink. And I'll just copy that and add it to these. Save that. Back to our application. When we open up the navbar, none of these are currently an active link. But when we click home, you can see that it's applying the active class to that link. And if we click features, it's applying the active link to the features. And if we click pricing, it's applying the active link to the pricing. You'll also have noticed that it's actually collapsing the navbar, which is what we want it to do. Now there are a couple more things we need to do. When we open the application, we want to ensure that the active nav link is set to home. So that's not the case at the minute, it's just not set to anything. And we also want to ensure that when we click this Navbar brand, it also sets the active nav link to home because we're returning to our home component. So that's not working either. So we're going to fix that now. So back to our VS Code window. And we're going to apply the on-click handler to the Navbar branding link. But what we also need to do is check if the route is the home route when the component first loads. And if it is, we need to set the active nav link to the home component. And I'll show you how we do that with another bit of state management. What we're going to do here is we're going to bring in use effect. And we're going to use a snippet we don't need this. And within React Router DOM, we also have available to us the use location hook. And what we'll do there is we'll create a variable to catch that location. And let me just show you what I mean by that, by just console logging the location when the component loads. So let's go back to our application. Go into our console. And if we refresh it, what we can see here is that the location is presenting some data to us. And the bit that we're interested in is the path name. So if I go to features, we can see that the path name has now changed. So it's /features. And we can capture that information then to use in our app. So back in VS Code, and get rid of this. Const path equals location dot path name. Then we need to do an if path is equal to / we need to set the active nav link to home. Now that will only work once unless we put in this dependency array, the location. And if we save that now, or if we go back into our app and click through the menu items, we can see that the active one on load is set to home. And if we click features, it sets to features, it's changed the URL, the path name, and we've got the features component, and the same for pricing. When we go home again, it goes back to the home component. If we're on features and we click the Navbar brand, it takes us back to the home and also sets home as the active nav link. And that's exactly what we want. So the last thing I want to do is just add a little bit of format into these components. And I also need to remove that Bootstrap JavaScript line from the index.js file. So I'll jump back into VS Code. And we'll go into our index.js file. We can get rid of this line now. It's commented out anyway, but we can get rid of that. And then we can close that, Control W, and we'll go through each of our components. So we'll bring up our home component. So we changed this div to a H3 and then add a class name of text primary. And then what we're going to do then is we're just going to wrap it in a div. And we'll give the div a class name of container fluid. And we can pretty much copy that and go into our features. Change that to features. Go into pricing. Change that to pricing. And then go into page not found. Change that to page not found. And we're just going to change this to danger to give it a red color. So if we jump back into our application, we should see that those classes have been applied. So we've got a nice blue color and it's a H3 tag for our components. And if we were to key in an invalid URL, we've got a page not found. Now that can be anything. You can create obviously a 404 or something like that, but for the purpose of this tutorial, the text is fine. And that's it. We've now got a fully functioning Bootstrap 5 navbar working in our React application. Hope you've enjoyed the video and you can take something from it, and don't forget, if you like the content of this video, please give it a like, share and add a comment in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button and bell icon. And I'll see you in the next one.